at what's called extended chord types. We've discussed the four foundational chord types, and we can see them written on page 22 at the top of that, where it says G major, G minor, G diminished, and G augmented. And it shows you chord types that are made up of 3 notes. We've talked about a melody being 1 note, a harmony being 2 notes, and a chord being 3 notes or more. And we've discussed that in book 1. That was one of the first things we learned. And then we've addressed chords for the last, basically, the whole book of 201. And now we're doing more on book 3, the advanced book. So we have those 4 foundational chord types, which have 3 notes in a chord. And then we're going to go and look at some extended chord types, which are basically chords that have 4 notes and sometimes 5 notes in the chord. So we're going to start with some that are common in the key of G, G chord types, extended chords. So if we're on the G major and we want a G major 6, we would simply take the 1, 3, 5 and take the 6 in addition to that. So it's basically making a major chord and adding the 6th note in the scale. So we would be playing a G, B, D, and an E. And if you want to write that on your page, I have a little space, a box for it on page 22. You can write G major 6, which is G, B, D, and E. And that's the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 6th note in the G major chord. If we're playing a G minor 6, we would take the 1st, flat, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 6th note. So we would now be playing G, B flat, D, and E. So we have a G minor 6 for the 2nd chord with a flatted 3rd. If we're playing a G major 9th, we would take the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and the 9th note in the major scale. So that basically means we would have a high A in the chord, because a major 9 basically means we're playing the 2nd note on the 2nd time, so we would basically have gone G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, and started over again on the higher part of an A. So that'd be a G major 9th with a 9 note, which is an A. So it'd be G, B, D, A. And then we have a G minor 9, which is a 1 flat the 3rd, a 5, and a 9. And that basically means we take the 1st note, the 3rd, and flat that, the 5th note, and the 9. So it's pretty straightforward when we're talking about 6s and 9 or 9ths. We take the 1st, 3rd, and the 5th, and the 6th note, or the 1st, 3rd, and the 5th, and the 9th note. And then, of course, a minor is 1 flat the 3rd, and a 5th, and a 6. And then, of course, the G minor 9 is 1 flat the 3rd, 5th, and 9. Okay, and so you can see some of those there. And if I'm playing a G major 6, we've got a G major chord here that we can basically use, and what it's playing on that page is the bottom 4 strings of that G major chord. So here's a G major, and here's a G major 6. If we want to play a G minor, we know this is a G minor here with the E minor position. The 6th string root is E minor, and playing the bottom 4 strings, we're just actually going to play this finger all the way down, and we add our 4th finger on the 2nd fret here. It's actually the 5th fret, the 2nd fret up from the 1st finger at the G minor 6. So here's a G major 6, G major 6, and a G minor, and a G minor 6, like that. Then we have a G major 9th, which is this G major position, and you add your 4th finger on the 1st string in the 5th fret. It's a G major 9th. It's a nice chord. And then a G minor 9 is just drop that to a minor. And that'll be a G minor 9. Okay, so let's go to the next page and we'll see some more extended chord types. We're actually going to talk about the 7 chord and the 7th chord. And there's a difference between those 2 chords. What we have is we have 7s that can be a little bit tricky. There's a difference between a G major 7 and a G7. A G major 7 uses a natural 7. It's also called a 7th. So the notes are 1, 3, 5, and 7. But a G7 uses the 1, 3, 5, and flats the 7. So if a chord says the word major or adds the th or seventh to seventh, it's a natural. If they just say G7, G9, etc., it means you flat the 7 or the 9. So you can see the sidebar for a diagram. That's page 23, and it basically says if you have a 1, 3, 5 and a natural 7, you'll call it a G major 7th, a G 7th, a G major 7, and sometimes you'll see it written as G triangle. That means major 7. And then we have a G7, which is 1, 3, 5 and flat the 7. And these are basically the main chords that we're going to be dealing with, is a major 6, major 9, minor 9, and then major 7, a 7, and those are the kind of the important ones. It's the same way with the minor chords for those 7s, but we're just focusing on the major chords right now, the major 7 and the G7. In contemporary music, writers often take shortcuts and they fail to make a distinction between the two. But each sound is unique, and knowing the difference is important. So see the difference in the one note between G major 7, and G7, and then of course A major 7, and A7 below. So you can see it's written out. But go ahead and write out the notes as they're written in that box. So we'll take the first, third, and the fifth note as G major and add the 7, the natural 7. So it'd be G, B, D, F sharp for the G major 7. Then the G7 is G, B, D, F, because we're flatting the F sharp to an F on the G7. Then for the A major 7th, we have 1, 3, 5, and 7, which is, if we're doing an A, we would write A, B, C sharp is 3, D sharp, E is 5, then F sharp, G sharp is 7. So it would be A, C sharp, E, and the 7 note is G sharp. Okay, so that's A major 7th. If we had an A7, it'd be A, C sharp, E, and flat the 7. So we had a G sharp, now we're playing a G. So that's what the notes would be for those chords. So if you're looking at the chords below that, you can see a G major 7, and a G7, and the difference between those three chords. There's one note difference, so it's G major and G major 7 and G7. Sounds like a progression into a C chord. And that usually works pretty well. G major 7, G7, into C. So that's the 4 chord. We had G, G major 7, G7, and the 4 chord in the key of G. If we're playing in the key of A, we have an A major chord, bottom 5 strings. A major 7 is one note difference there, and then A7. We can do that same thing where we played the 4 chord after that on the D chord. So we go back to A major 7, A7, D, like that. So those are a few ways we can play the A major 7, and A7 and see the difference between those chords. It's one note difference, and that's important that you pay attention to that distinction. Alright, so let's go to the next page on 24, and we have extended chord types, an additional one, and we have the notes written out for the F sharp 7, add the 11s, just so you can see how that works. We're taking the F sharp, we're having a 7 because it's flatted. Remember, if we said F sharp major 7, then it would be 1, 3, 5, 7, and then we take the 11th note, which is the 11th note in the scale. So we had 8 at F sharp. If we're in the key of F sharp, it's going to be F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, and then a half step to B. So that's, I believe, going to be the 11. So let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is F sharp. Then G sharp is 9. Then A sharp is 10, and B is 11. So that is correct. B is the 11th chord, the 11th note in the scale of F sharp So that's basically a F sharp 7 add 11 is this chord. And there's five notes in that chord. So here's the deal. When you have a chord that's 5 notes, you're typically not going to write out the chord like that. You're basically just going to note it as an F sharp with an E in it, or F sharp / E. And chords become more complex when you start to have 5 notes or more. And you've got the notes written out, so you can see this one. So you can kind of see the basic idea about structure. But if you get into more complex chords, you're going to probably be reading some music, and you're going to be seeing a more specific difference by the music notation when you're looking at those chords. For the purposes of what we're doing, we're learning to play by ear, and we're going to learn to notice the differences, and we'll hopefully be able to tell the difference between how a chord sounds, as opposed to having to write out the chord every time we play it. So this is just to give you a basic idea of how writing out the chord works and the chord structure, so you can have an understanding of chord structure, so you can navigate through online and when you see serious errors. Okay, so we're going to go to the next page, and we're going to play page 25.